The gap between the Championship and the Premier League is massive. It's no longer a gap, it's a gulf. Nay, not even a gulf. It's a chasm. It's something which has been talked about for a long time, but no one can say anymore that there isn't one. The 2023-24 season was the first Premier League season where we saw all three newly promoted sides get relegated, and in the Championship, all three newly relegated sides were in the top four and would have been promoted had it not been for the heroics of Ipswich Town. And now you look at this season, the current bottom three in the Premier League is the three newly promoted sides, and in the Championship, two of the newly relegated sides are in the top three. So it's a massive problem, but it's not just between the Premier League and the Championship where there is this gap. I believe there's also another gap growing at an alarming rate between the Championship and League One, which doesn't get spoken about enough. So in the current direction we're heading in, we could have a worrying situation where there's a massive gap between the Premier League and the Championship, but also the Championship and League One. And then we just have pretty much the same teams in the same divisions every year. So how did this all start? Well, the obvious place to kick things off is the formation of the Premier League. Before 1992, it was not uncommon to see teams you wouldn't expect become champions of England, and some big clubs getting relegated. It may surprise people below a certain age to know that Chelsea were playing in the second tier as recently as 1989. But what happened over time after the Premier League came in is teams managed to establish themselves. This eventually developed into the so-called Big Four, and that would in time become the Big Six. Now in the 2010s, we still had a good level of unpredictability with teams coming down. Newcastle and Aston Villa both had spells in the Championship. Meanwhile, in the Championship, only 7 teams in 10 seasons between 2010 and 2020 managed to get instantly promoted just after getting relegated. That's 7 teams out of 30. It seemed like we had this perfect gap between the Premier League and the Championship. But now we've gone from 7 teams in 10 seasons getting instantly promoted after relegation to 6 teams in 4 seasons. It would be 8 in 5 if Burnley and Sheffield United get promoted this season. So I wonder if anything significant happened around 2020 which could have started this trend. Oh yeah.
Tried so hard and got so far, but in the end, it doesn't even matter. I had to fall to lose it all.
Okay, that was a bit over dramatic, but the point is COVID really messed everything up. The reason is that Championship finances were very dicey just before then anyway. You had clubs losing millions upon millions each year just to have a chance at getting to the Premier League. And all it took was that one gust of wind to really knock down that house of cards. And COVID was that. It's part of the reason why we had the likes of Derby and Reading, who both went from promotion challengers to relegation. But with regards to the gap between the Premier League and the Championship, Premier League clubs were still making millions from broadcasting rights. It was a minor bump in the road for the Premier League. For the Championship, it was more like... Possibly the most significant season for the divide between the Premier League and the Championship, though, was the 2023-24 season. This was, of course, the first season of this century where all 3 newly promoted sides were instantly relegated, but it's not just because of that. That's obviously not a great look for the divide, but you've got to think about the long-term impact of those 3 teams coming straight back down. It meant that all the teams who stayed up heading into this season were heading into it with at least 2 consecutive Premier League seasons under their belt. That means at least 2 seasons worth of Premier League money and at least 2 seasons of assembling a Premier League squad. And when I say a Premier League squad, I don't mean just having an 11 good enough to compete in the Premier League. I'm talking about effectively having 2 11s good enough for the Premier League. A great example of this happening is Nottingham Forest defender Andrew Omobamidele. Forest signed him for £11 million in the summer of 2023. He was one of the most promising defenders in the Championship with Norwich City. But since joining, he's started just 8 games, hasn't played a game in the Premier League this season, and hasn't even made the bench in some weeks because they don't have enough room for him in the squad. Nottingham Forest were able to do this, and yes, I know they're having a remarkable season this season, but keep in mind prior to this season they were one of the poorer teams in the Premier League and had only recently got promoted. You compare that to Leicester City this season. This was Leicester City's team to face Wolves just before Christmas. This was the best team they could put out. It genuinely might be the worst 11 a Premier League team has ever put out. And this is Leicester City we're talking about here, a team who had 9 consecutive Premier League seasons prior to their relegation in 2023, and this is how much they're struggling. What's happening is we're getting very close to a stage where we don't just have a big 6 in the Premier League, but a big 17 in English football. And that big 17 is made up of 17 teams who have been in the Premier League for multiple years. They've used the Premier League money to make their squad significantly stronger than anything a newly promoted side is able to produce in just one summer after being promoted. And we're almost seeing it this season that the only way one of those 17 teams is getting relegated is a combination of them having an absolute stinker and one of the newly promoted teams being very, very good. A lot is riding on Ipswich Town this season. And even if one of those 17 teams were to get relegated, they would likely get straight back up anyway because they have so many players on their books. They only need to sell a handful, just make sure everything's above board. And that brings me on to the Championship, where unless several things go wrong for a particular team, Luton Town, then relegated sides are just instantly in the conversation for promotion. 15 years ago, when a team got relegated to the Championship, they would have to sell all their best players. That's not necessarily the case anymore. And with the current path we're on, we could get to a stage where we've got the same 6 teams getting promoted and relegated each season. And then the only way anyone else gets promoted from the Championship is if they're incredibly well run, or they've got a very rich owner. And even then they'll probably just end up in the never-ending cycle of promotion and relegation. This video is brought to you by our good friends at SBK. If you haven't heard of them yet, then where have you been? SBK's comprehensive range of markets and exclusive offers makes it the best place to bet on the Championship this season. Whether you're creating an accumulator or customizing your bet builder, SBK has got you covered. Don't believe us? Sign up today and find out. So the Premier League and Championship gap is only getting wider and wider, but we're at risk of a similar thing happening between the Championship and League One. While it's not exactly been reflected recently in the teams who have just been relegated getting instantly promoted, it's something I fear could become increasingly the case. A big example is Birmingham City. Now, you may have seen how much money they spent last summer. It was around £30 million, including an estimated £15 million on Jay Stansfield alone. The most ridiculous thing is, they probably wouldn't have been able to do this if they didn't get relegated to League One. That's because League One isn't affected by profit and sustainability rules. So what I fear could become increasingly common in the coming years is teams coming down from the Championship into League One and essentially doing a Birmingham, throwing money at it to make sure they get back up at the first time of asking, and use it as an opportunity to refresh the squad, which they couldn't have been able to do in the Championship. With more and more financial investment in EFL clubs coming from the United States, I think that's a very real possibility, and then relegation from the Championship is nothing more than just a gap year. And what this could end up leading to is smaller clubs essentially hitting a ceiling and not being able to break through unless they get some incredibly wealthy owners. So English football's in a very difficult position where at the current rate we'll have the same 17 teams in the Premier League each season, the same 6 teams getting promoted and relegated from the Premier League and Championship each season, and then more or less the same teams in the Championship each season, with the odd team dropping down to League One, which isn't necessarily a bad thing anymore because they have a chance to spend some money. So how do we stop this from happening? Well, the easy answer is more funding across the EFL to create a more even playing field with the Premier League. But last March, Premier League clubs failed to agree on a deal which will see them give more money to the Football League. I wonder why. And there's been very little talk since of a deal being revived, but all hope is not lost yet. Premier League clubs were told by the government that if they don't agree a financial package, the new independent football regulator will impose one on them anyway. The problem is we're still yet to find out when that's going to be, and we need it to happen sooner rather than later, because the longer we stay on this current path, the more damage is going to be done, and it's going to be even more difficult to recover from what's happened. So there we have it. This is the massive problem facing English football. How big do you think the gap is between the Championship and the Premier League? Let me know in the comments section below. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure you like and subscribe for more content like this. I've been Ryan Dilks from the Second Tier, and a big thank you for watching.
It starts with
One thing, I don't know why. It doesn't even matter how hard you try. Keep that in mind. I designed this rhyme to explain in due time. All I know, time is a valuable thing. Watch it fly by as the pendulum swings. Watch it count down to the end of the day. The clock takes life away. It's so